And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Hi there, I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska aviation weather outlook on this Tuesday, December 17th, 2024. And this outlook will cover the midweek period, especially for Wednesday and on Thursday. But to set things up, we are watching an area of low pressure come up out of the North Pacific that's going to impact areas of the far southern panhandle. There are winter weather advisories for accumulating snow for Prince of Wales Island and eastward through Ketchikan, Metlakatla. This area here will pick up 3 to 7 inches of snowfall this Tuesday evening through Wednesday afternoon. And there could even be a little bit of a light mix of precipitation trying to come in some areas. Certainly this would be the region whereby there will be lower ceilings, visibilities, and icing in the precipitation-bearing clouds. So we expect IFR conditions across the southern panhandle on Wednesday morning. Back out to the west, we have a collection of lows, lower Bering Sea down along the Aleutians. Nothing particularly strong, but you have broad areas of IFR conditions. Central Bering down through St. Matthew, St. Paul, up into the Alaska Peninsula and out back toward the central western Aleutians. Getting into Wednesday afternoon, we find still some area of IFR here across the southern parts of the panhandle from around Wrangell down through Hyder, Metlakatla, and still westward toward Prince of Wales Island. Back out to the west, we have a broad area along a trough or frontal boundary that still has IFR conditions pushing up along the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, Bristol Bay, Kuskokwim Bay, Nunavik Island, and then sweeping back down across the central eastern Aleutians in the far north. MVFR conditions along the Arctic coast, the Beaufort Sea coastline between Utqiagvik and Kaktovik. Still some blowing snow possible there around Kaktovik. And then MVFR conditions that pull up across areas of the southeast mainland for Wednesday afternoon. Thursday morning, we find lingering IFR conditions across the central southern panhandle into the Gulf, back toward Kodiak Island, the Alaska Peninsula, up to St. Matthew, then a broad area of IFR across the lower Bering, across the Aleutian chain. And in the Thursday afternoon, still some lingering IFR conditions across the southern panhandle, butting up against the intercoastal mountains of British Columbia. And then back out again, IFR conditions, Kodiak Island, especially central Alaska Peninsula, coming out east of the Pribilovs up towards St. Matthew, and then kind of a patchwork of IFR conditions, lower Bering Sea, central and western Aleutians. The most noteworthy thing pretty much now through the Christmas holiday is that we're generally going to find low pressure residing over the lower half of the Bering and the Aleutians, and then occasional lows pulling up into the Gulf Coast, along the Gulf Coast. This is going to keep the weather active across this region, at times even up into the southeastern mainland. But overall, we're not going to see any big storms come pushing inland across the mainland here as we head through the Christmas holiday. So most of the active weather will continue to be along areas of the Gulf Coast, panhandle, back along the Alaska Peninsula, maybe brushing the southwest coast, and then certainly out along the Aleutians. And looking at what we have for past conditions Wednesday up there in the Brooks Range, Anatuvik, and Adigan Pass, VFR conditions there. Further south, along the west arm of the Alaska Range, Lake Clark and Merrill should generally hold on to MVFR conditions Wednesday. Rainy Pass, MVFR may try to become VFR here in the afternoon. Windy Pass, also MVFR conditions becoming VFR, though south of the south entrance, MVFR conditions should hold. Isabel Pass should generally see MVFR conditions throughout the day Wednesday, as will Mentasta Pass. Now, as we drive down across the Copper River Basin, there will be a band of VFR conditions early Wednesday, giving way, though, to MVFR conditions at Tanita Pass. And overall, Portage Pass through the length should be MVFR, though the west entrance may become VFR in the afternoon. And in the far northern panhandle, VFR conditions are anticipated on Wednesday, though the southern portion of the panhandle, especially Prince of Wales Island and Ketchikan, Metlakatla, will be dealing with snow or even a little bit of light mixed precipitation and that winter weather advisory. So that means lower ceilings, visibility in snow. And areas across the panhandle, on Wednesday morning, we find the freezing line to be toward the outer southern coast areas of the panhandle along the Gulf Coast, back up along Bristol Bay, Kuskokwim Bay to just north of St. Matthew. Freezing levels aloft are not all that impressive. Pretty chilly air mass across the mainland. We find freezing levels aloft bump up above 2,000 feet once you get out into the Gulf and south of the Alaska Peninsula. And you have to get way down toward the North Pacific and toward Vancouver Island, south of Haida Gwaii, to find freezing levels at 4,000 feet. So it's not that we've seen a lot of times this fall where we've had a big dome of warmer air ahead of a stronger low pressure and frontal system. We're not seeing that at this time. So we don't have that, what we call baroclinic instability to feed these storms, but nevertheless, still some active weather. So we start out Wednesday, areas of the Panhandle toward Hyder and east there of Ketchikan, still some moderate icing possible above 6,000 feet, but conditions should begin to improve, at least the precipitation letting up as we go through the afternoon and early evening on Wednesday. Back to the west, because of this conglomeration of some low pressure and some trough fronts, we're finding areas of moderate icing south and north of the Alaska Peninsula, extending up between St. Paul and Nunavik Island, and then back out to the far western Aleutian, generally above 6,000 feet here in Alaska Peninsula, and then back out toward the Bering and up toward the Bering Strait. In any of those cloud layers above 4,000 feet, there could be some moderate icing. Upper level winds, 30,000 feet, jet stream level. The most couple notable features are this little jet core anticyclonically curved, upwards of 125 knots in the North Pacific, southwest of Haida Gwaii, and then coming across British Columbia, Western Canada there, over 110, 120 knots. Back to the west, we find southeasterly flow, 75 to 85 knots across the Alaska Peninsula, back toward the Pribilovs, and then in the interior, at least near and west of the Alaska Range, lighter south winds 50 knots. Now bringing it down though to 9,000 feet, 700 millibars, we have a belt of winds that extend from eastern Russia, especially most notable over the central Bering, winds upwards of 65 knots from the southeast. That low, one of the low circulations here over the eastern central Aleutians, and then a broad band of south-southeast flow across the North Pacific south of the Gulf. And at 3,000 feet, we find similarly this band of stronger winds out over the Bering, central northern Bering, coming across the southwest coast, Kuskokwim, Bristol Bay, around or just over 50 knots. And then a broader area of winds 50 to 65 knots south of the Gulf in the North Pacific. They're of note, though, winds at 3,000 feet. There is a band of stronger winds south of the Brooks Range, north of the Yukon River, and also off of the Beaufort Sea coast, north of Dead Horse and Kaktovik. So the greatest threat for turbulence on Wednesday will be over areas of the southwest mainland, including the Alaska Peninsula. There could be some pockets of isolated severe turbulence, south side Nunavik Island, around Kuskokwim, maybe the west side of Bristol Bay, and then through some of the gaps here along the Alaska Peninsula, surface to 5,000 feet, trailing out to the eastern central Aleutians, surface to 3,000 feet. And then in the far southeast here, areas kind of Dixon entrance and to the south of Ketchikan, Metlakatla, there could be some isolated moderate turbulence, surface to 6,000 feet, and then a little bit of isolated moderate turbulence maybe around and just north of Kaktovik there out over the Beaufort Sea coastline. So that's the way things are looking for turbulence on Wednesday, and thank you for watching.